It's great to be together when there's a huge lull in international affairs with not much going on, so that we can reflect on the broader geopolitical landscape. And I'm really delighted, honored to welcome Ambassador Frank Lavin to this event. I went on online and went to the Wikipedia page for Ambassador Lavin's Wikipedia page, and then I copied and pasted the URL into ChatGPT and said, "Can you summarize this for an introduction?" And ChatGPT refused to do it. He said, "No, I can't. There's too much there. It can't be summarized." So then facing with that, I had to do it myself. And
so that ends the evening. Then?
No, that makes it very.
Okay.
It's going to make for a long introduction. No, but if you look at Frank's biography, it's a truly remarkable journey, it spans politics, it spans business, geopolitics, diplomacy, trade negotiations. Starting out. I guess at a very young age in the Reagan White House, because Frank started in 1980 in the Reagan White House. In 1987, he became director of political affairs. According to Wikipedia, he was 29 years old at that time. So you can imagine, those 7 years that preceded that, in the thick of things. And director of political affairs just at the time where the Soviet Union was essentially collapsing, and starting to collapse at least under the Gorbachev administration, involved in organizing events in Reykjavik and just really in the middle of global geopolitics during the Reagan administration. And that continued on during the George Bush the father's administration, and then during the George W. Bush administration, where you did a stint as ambassador.
Yeah. But the important point is after Bush the father lost re-election and Clinton came in, that's where I said, I need an MBA. I'm going to go get an executive MBA because I want to broaden myself and I want to get a grounding in some disciplines outside of public policy.
And started working in the private sector.
Started working in the private sector.
I think I'll stop there.
There's hope. There's hope.
I will, and then a return to.
They keep pulling you back in.
Becoming an entrepreneur, even. And so it's a delight. It's an honor to be talking with you, and welcome to UCLA. I hope it'll be the start of a longer association. So we discussed a little bit the subject matter. I just want to say also. Ambassador Lavin wrote this book that came out last year.
Yeah.
And I guess that's the tail end of your book tour. I'm going to make it the tail end of your book tour. But it's about his years in the Reagan White House. And I've been reading this with great interest. It, of course, is a big reminder of all the events that happened that were defining. And some of them of relevance today when it comes to some of the wisdom in there. So I'm going to take the liberty of reading a couple of paragraphs that you wrote, and then get your sense of how they apply to today. So here's what Frank wrote. On page 5, actually, it's early in the book. There are considerable difficulties in evaluating any president because of the subjectivity involved. The first blush of political commentary largely reflects one's personal politics. If the president's views comport with your own, you happen to have a high opinion of him. If the president has a different philosophy than you, he could not have done a good job. The second constraint in political evaluation is that people who cannot evaluate policy will tend to substitute a sort of moralizing. By this logic, there cannot be any reason for a policy different from your preferences other than that the president is morally deficient. People who advocate less expensive energy do not care about the environment. People who advocate school choice are trying to defund public schools. People who want increased defense spending are militarists or bullies. And I was reflecting upon this because I remember during the Reagan administration, I was a young boy, in fact, but I was already politically, aware, and many people were criticizing Reagan in terms that are not that different from the criticisms you see for any president, and so I wanted to get your perspective on this current moment. Is it an aberration, or is it truly something out of the ordinary?
Well, I think there's a longer-term trend which is not aberrational, but then I think it's highly stylized moment where one individual's behavior is so sort of theatrical and audacious that it puts a special kind of gloss on the moment. So the elements of it are, more in sync with sort of where the nation feeling is, but elements just aren't. By the way, let me begin by just saying thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for hosting me today. And I think business schools are cool. And I think business students are cool. And what I love about it, I remember I spent about 12 years in government with Reagan 1, Reagan 2, and then Bush 1. And we all got fired when Clinton came in. And I said, I've got to develop kind of a skill for the marketplace. I've spent my whole life in public policy and decision making, and I enjoyed it. But what I don't want to do is be a lobbyist. I don't want to run a trade association. I want to do something commercial. I want to do something in the marketplace where I think I can earn money and stand on my own 2 feet. And let me just parachute into a business school for 2 years and kind of absorb what I can absorb. But it was extremely important for me just to reorient myself in my thinking and develop literacy and depth. And it was absolutely important. Then I went right out. I had a pretty good background in Chinese language. I had a pretty good background in quant skills, and I went right out of B school to Citibank, China, and worked in China finance and then China e-commerce, and I really enjoyed it. So made a huge difference in my life. So I hope everybody here has the same kind of positive journey and grabs that diploma and goes and does something. The door's open. The world has never been more open for people who are hungry, and I suspect there are a lot of hungry people in this room. And go make something happen. So good for you. Congratulations on what you're doing, and good luck in the journey. Now, what was the question? I feel like I just gave the graduation ceremony address.
Is the Trump administration uniquely abnormal, or are they being treated the same way every other president has been treated?
Here's the quote unquote normal part, which is we're at a moment that I think was somewhat reflected in the Biden and the Obama administration of less international activity, less connectivity international. Put that aside for this discussion, but that the president attaches less importance to historical relationships and treaties and America's leadership in the world. That I think is consistent with his predecessors, all of whom said, look, to put it more politely, we're doing too much. We're doing too much overseas, and we're going to do less. And our security will actually be enhanced if we do less. If we do more, you risk actually contributing to the problem. So if we're measured about this and we reduce our footprint, we're going to be better off, and we'll save money as well. So that part is, you might say it's misplaced, it's subjective, it might be an error, but at least it's consistent with the trend of the moment. What he enjoys doing is a theatrical element where the story's always about him, and the narrative always has a personal dimension to it, whereas I think most presidents tend to sort of abstract themselves from the story and talk about the national interest and where's our country going and what do we have to do about it. But he enjoys putting himself front and center, and he enjoys sort of the electricity of the spotlight. He enjoys, the audacity is, to my mind, it's by design, because it results in some kind of response from the other party. So it's not a measured approach where he's trying to send a signal to induce some kind of an outcome. He's deliberately using shock value as a tool. I would say Trump likes to use friction as a management tool. So that's different. And I think you pay a price for it, but there's some potency to it as well.
There's an issue of a different style, but I'm thinking about the way you wrote about President Reagan in your book.
Yeah.
With a high degree of reverence in many places. Sure. And there were times of absolute grace in that presidency. For example, the speech made in Normandy for the 40th anniversary of D-Day. I think that in terms of style, we don't see anything comparable here, but in terms of substance, we do see definitely decisions that change the course of history, and where the evaluation might take a few decades to pan out.
Well, look,
Reagan, to be provocative on purpose.
Yeah, Reagan's view, I think, was more consistent with most presidents, which is to say, I want to I want to make my proposals as inviting as possible for people to subscribe to. And I understand it's a big country. I understand there's a wide range of opinions. But wherever you stand vis-a-vis what I'm about to articulate, I want you to, at the end of the remarks, I want you to say, I'm now 5% more favorable or 10% more favorable about it. So my job in communication is to induce some kind of outcome. The point of communication isn't shock value or isn't friction, but I'm trying to take this room someplace. And so I want to put forward my ideas in such a way that's as easy as possible for you to say, well, I'm not sure I like the guy, but he's got a fair point here. Or some people actually, I like the guy and I'm actually support him. But wherever you stand, I'm going to treat you as a potential customer. By the way, I always thought this came from radio, and then he was in radio as a sportscaster before he went to Hollywood. But the point is, you're speaking to the nation. You're speaking to the nation before an era of market segmentation, and how you present yourself and how you present your ideas is sort of a universal attribute of how you communicate. He always said his hero as a young man when he first got the vote, that he voted for him all 4 times, was Franklin Roosevelt. And FDR did 2 things in his national communications that Reagan stole. I think about everybody stole these ideas, but FDR was the first. FDR was the first. We only had 1 or 2 presidents before Franklin Roosevelt who would give national radio addresses, because radio came to the forefront in the 1920s. But it was really in the mid-1930s that a majority of American households had radio. So it's a new medium. FDR did 2 things. Before Franklin Roosevelt, every national presidential address was a radio transmission of a speech. So President Hoover or President Coolidge would give a speech to the Economic Club of New York, and that would say CBS radio network will now carry the speech. So it was a way of just amplifying the audience for speech. FDR, once you're getting up to 50% of the nation has radio, you're saying, look, the people in the room are the less important people. It's the people in the country. You can speak to 100 million people. So FDR said, we don't need anybody in the room. I can speak to the nation, the citizens of the nation, with a radio. So it doesn't have to be a radio transmission of an address in a room. And when you do it the old way, you're telling everybody you're simply a spectator. You're simply a spectator. I'm actually speaking to the Economic Club of New York and you're listening in, right? When you do it the way FDR did, he said, no. I am speaking to you. You're the audience. So that was one big shift FDR made. The other shift, which is kind of consistent with the first point, is let's approach people on their terms. Let's approach people as peers. Let's end grandiosity or pomposity. You don't need to say, ladies and gentlemen, an address for the President of the United States. There might be times and state occasions when you need that, but it also can be a wall between the audience. So let's speak in a peer setting. Let's use everyday terms. Let's use terms that friends speak with friends with. So he called the speeches fireside chats. No history majors here. He called it fireside chats, how friends speak with friends in a chat by the fireside, right? So I'm approaching you to peer, and I'm sharing with you my thoughts, and I'm inviting you to subscribe to my point of view. But Reagan said, well, that's the way to approach. That's the way to articulate your message.
Well, the contrast with today, perhaps, is that the type of media that we have rewards, anger and shock value rather than...
I think you're right. Social media means a very fragmented audience, and the most outrageous comment, is propelled ahead, and the most thoughtful comment can get lost in the shuffle.
All news is good. All attention is good attention or good news. Yeah.
Well, I think that's more of a Trump approach.
Yes.
Yeah.
I wanted to shift a little bit gears, to talk a little bit about the geopolitical environment, because I know that a little bit building on the idea of perspective. When the attack on Iran started 3 or 4 days ago, you got the perception from the media and from basically popular discussions that this was an unprecedented move. But there's been a long history, including a history during the Reagan administration, starting with the release of the hostages at the very beginning of the Reagan administration. And there's been, of course, a very long history of interaction, animosity with Iran. I was wondering, it's a little bit the elephant in the room, but this is something that just happened, and if you had any hot takes.
Well, we don't know how the story's going to end. For me personally, my view is foreign policy demands some type of architecture. What is the purpose of foreign policy? What is the purpose of U.S. leadership? What is the outcome that's going to make us happy? And then we use, building block elements of what decisions we make around the world to fit into that. In other words, foreign policy is not a series of likes and dislikes that this fellow is rude to me or unpleasant or unhelpful, therefore he's my enemy. But the point is none of that has anything to do with state behavior and our ultimate objective. By the way, that's not radically different than business. But all of us are involved in sort of business decisions. Yes, some people are more collegial and easier to work with. Other people are more difficult. But you'd say if you're an A player, you say, I'm not going to be governed by my personal sentiment here, but I have to say what gives me the best outcome in my business decision. So I'd say the same thing holds for foreign policy. So you ought to be able to find common ground with disparate people. So it's not clear to my mind what the outcome of this is. I'd simply say Iranian government is a dreadful government. It is repressive and it's internationally destabilizing, and all Americans should be most concerned about the nuclear program. So on that basis, it's very difficult to have any sympathy for Iranian government situation. But my hope is that we, the U.S. or other states in the region, have some kind of end game in mind about some kind of stable government that we'll be able to work with after they're all gone. But we don't know yet. We don't know if something breaks or changes or shapes. I think the worst case would be simply to damage their military infrastructure and then walk away. I don't think that necessarily helps. It buys us some time maybe, but it doesn't really solve the problem.
If you break it, you own it, meaning you have to go all the way.
Yeah, but theoretically, the government is so miserable, the government is so repressive, that theoretically there's a receptivity on the ground to something else that brings stability. But again, we just don't know yet.
We see again here the distinction between style and substance, the substance of trying to change the course of Middle East situation might be justifiable, the manner in which it's done without consultation of Congress, without consultation of any allies, without any attempt to mobilize the multilateral system.
Yeah. Well, it's surprising. By the way, I think he could have prevailed in Congress. I think he could have because, again, this is a reprehensible government. So I don't think there was a sentiment. There might be people saying when's the appropriate use of force and what criteria to have to everything. Those are all fair questions. But I think he would have prevailed. What was interesting to me is Iran, when I think they have attacked in 48 hours 11 different Arab states with their own military. So whatever wavering or indecision there might have been, all collabing. So Tehran's own mismanagement means Trump benefits from, I think, a pretty united Arab front to say these guys have to go.
I appreciate your unwillingness to make predictions on what will happen because that's usually the wisest course when you're in the heat of the moment.
Yeah, and I can tell you from my time in government, a lot of government analysis isn't necessarily based on policy or philosophy, but is simply cost-benefit analysis, meaning the American public will accord wide latitude to the president, but you better pull the rabbit out of the hat. You better say this is going to be worth it, and it's not going to be a long-term endeavor, and there's not going to be boots on the ground. There's not going to be a lot of Americans coming home in coffins. So you better make this thing work. And if you make it work, you did it. You pulled the rabbit out of the hat, and we're all better off. And good for you.
Yeah, time will tell, I suppose.
Yeah.
So in many of the positions that you occupied, you interacted with China as either as a trade negotiator at a time where the policy of the United States was one of engagement with China, and of course we've come away. I wanted, in this third topic, to talk about that aspect of things. Was engagement a mistake, or did we just not give it enough time?
Yeah. No. By the way, there was one brilliant success in U.S. engagement with China, but it was fated to be time limited. So, and it was maybe so successful we don't even give it credit. But the initial rationale of Nixon-Kissinger outreach was a Cold War rationale. It was to say, We are enormously concerned about what the Soviet Union's doing. We know there's all sorts of friction with China. Let's do what we can to have some kind of working relationship with China. And Kissinger's dictum was, we need to be closer to Moscow and Beijing than either of those two countries are to each other. So whatever Moscow thinks of us, they've got even more problems with Beijing, and whatever Beijing thinks of us, they've got even more problems with Moscow. So whatever happens, there's not going to be some kind of Sino-Soviet condominium that's going to gang up on us. So that was brilliant. That was
divide
brilliant.
and conquer.
Divide and conquer. At least saying we're not, of all the problems you've got, we're not the greatest problem. The other fellows are the greatest problem. So that was extremely well done, but that comes to an end when the Cold War ends. The rationale, the strategic rationale of that comes to an end. I think there was a good decade past that when engagement worked, and I'd credit Deng Xiaoping for a lot of that, and a sense of restraint part of that China at that time is a much poorer country, doesn't have international wherewithal, and so engaging with others is in its own best interest. As it picks up economic heft, its ability to sort of set its own course continues to grow as well. And Xi Jinping, I think, in many ways is sort of an opposite of Deng Xiaoping, that he does not believe in restraint or does not believe in working within the system, believes in sort of, he's a Chinese nationalist, and he grew up in the single party dictatorship. So a lot of what we're dealing with is that kind of behavior. By the way, I still think in many respects he's a policy rationalist, but engagement in itself is going to have a ceiling for anybody. Engagement, it's not, and by the way, when you think about it, engagement is sort of almost a form of narcissism if you carry it to its conclusion that I'm so good, and if you see what I've got to offer, you're going to fall in love with me. Well, maybe yes, maybe no. Maybe some people do, some people don't. But be careful about falling in love with yourself and saying, I need everybody else to fall in love with me as well. So I think there's a ceiling to engagement, and it helped, I think, in commercial activity, and it never really helped on political military activity, never really helped in human rights.
They fell in love with capitalism and globalization, but not so much with democracy and human rights.
That's right. And it was Nick Kristof, the New York Times columnist, said instead of Marxist-Leninism, it's now market-Leninism. So it's a one-party dictatorship, but they respect largely the free market. By the way, that in itself is pretty damn impressive when you think about the number of smart people in the Soviet Union, and not one person in the entire 70-year history of the Soviet Union said, by the way, this system isn't working. Or Cuba's a much smaller population, but again, in 60 years of dictatorship, not one person saying this is a disaster. So at least Deng Xiaoping had to stand up and say, this is terrible. We're hurting the entire country. Let's move to market economics, and they did it. So good for him.
Should we have waited longer? Because, I mean, I think the perception was that the benefits of engagement with China accrued to China a lot. The perception in the U.S. is that there were lots of cost bearers.
Yeah.
In my class, I talk about the China shock, the fact that a lot of manufacturing jobs were lost to trade with China. Of course, the unseen is the, tremendous benefit that trade with China brought to consumers in the form of lower prices and more abundant goods, et cetera. But there's a perception of asymmetry that perhaps explains what happens.
That, by the way, even if China didn't exist, I think you still have that undercurrent. And that was a lot of Trump's messaging in his first race, is that internationalization has worked to our detriment, that we're suckers. It's almost, I mean, this was his rhetoric in his first term. In his second term, it's a pervasive sort of economic thesis. It's almost Marxist in its universalism. It's almost every single trading partner of the United States has redounded to our detriment. Every single trading partner is just hurting us. And we need to push back against every single one. We are going to have universal tariffs against every country in the world. There's not some guy in Thailand just selling us mangoes. That does not exist. Every single economic relationship is to hurt us. And so and tariffs that will right that hurt. So it's an extraordinary economic theory, and my guess is he did not go to UCLA. So
it's also accompanied with this sort of amendment that if you join the United States as a 51st state, then you will enjoy zero tariffs and all that hurt will go away, which is amazing. Amazingly incoherent when you think about it, because if Canada were to join the U.S. and access the U.S. market without any trade impediments, presumably the hurt wouldn't end.
Yeah, and to your point, no surprise, open societies move ahead and closed societies stagnate. And no surprise, economies that allow themselves to accept competition will move ahead. And countries that don't do that stagnate. So no surprise, again, after several decades of U.S. incrementally liberalizing and incrementally becoming more international, our per capita GDP just outpaces every other industrial. It's extraordinary the amount of success that liberalization brought to the United States, the amount of prosperity. So you had, I think, the greatest economic growth in the history of recorded data. You have the highest per capita GDP of any industrialized country. So it's an extraordinary amount of success. It tells me resentment and grievance messaging has a potency that outpaces reality. And I think it's dangerous, because if you build your messaging on grievances, you're really kind of taking the country the wrong way. Other presidents would maybe have a little tilt or a little flavor of that, because you have to respect if there's an undercurrent of unhappiness. But to say presidential leadership or political leadership means you are helping a country prepare for the next stage of its journey, not that you are resenting the next stage of the journey and you're saying what my proposal is to deny that the rest of the world exists and to have an autarkic, sort of national level economy. So it's an extraordinary shift on the back of what I would say is considerable success to be able to say we're going backwards.
When it comes to China, the new attitude of disengagement and breaking apart seems to be bipartisan. When we had 4 years of the Biden administration, the Trump tariffs from the first administration were not rescinded. And you seem to have, in fact, traditionally the Democratic Party has been more on the side of protecting workers and jobs than the Republican Party, which was the party of free trade. And you see now a sort of broad consensus. Now, how deep it is, I'm not sure. But.
Yeah. I think that's fair analysis. China, since inception, had a higher tariff rate than the U.S. had. So we had this sort of long-dated and growing trade imbalance with China. Now, again, most economists would say the consumer and the purchaser benefits as much from a economic transaction as the seller. So you're not hurting yourself by getting inexpensive microwaves or socks into the United States. And you're going to create this enormous consumer boom in the United States by importing overseas things that can be done cheaper, better, faster than trying to do it yourself. And that was sort of the direction the U.S. went down. By the way, again, I would say with considerable success, the beneficiaries of internationalization are always a little quieter and a little more long dated, and the injured party is a little more immediate, and there's always an example of dislocation. And when you have industries that are concentrated geographically, I think you see then it becomes a political opportunity. So I'm thinking of steel and autos, where you say by the nature of the industry, there's a facility and there's a few thousand people working there and they're unhappy. So so you have pushback for those industries. But boy, the United States benefited enormously from this. And look, there was this interesting bipartisan consensus in the years leading up to Trump to say there's two ways to try to come to terms with this China challenge, economic challenge. One is we can do what Trump did and put tariffs on China and punish China, so to speak, but we're hurting our own economy as well. The alternative is you lower tariffs with everybody else. The alternative is let's look at an Asia-wide trade agreement in which trade with Southeast Asia, Japan, Korea, and so far all their other trading partners is reduced. So we're still bleeding China for investment and economic activity, but we're not hurting the U.S. economy. So that was the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And that got negotiated through in the Obama administration, but he never docked the ship. And then in the course of the 2016 campaign, Trump said this is a disaster. Hillary Clinton does a backflip and repudiates it. And the thing
she had negotiated it.
She negotiated it. And, Hillary played a very cautious campaign, which maybe I would have recommended. She was sort of in the lead for most of the time. Trump was, an angry guy, and he certainly had a stage presence, but he was always behind her in the polls. And so I think she decided, play it safe. Don't engage this guy intellectually. You're going to win. You might only win by 2 or 3 points, but you're going to win. So just don't give him room and try to keep him boxed in. And he outflanked her. So
it didn't work.
It didn't work.
But it did create a sort of consensus against trade, even though, in the end, NAFTA was ratified under.
They redid some of the terms. By the way, even now in polling data, most Americans are against tariffs. So it paralyzed, I think,
for
Washington.
immigration, it's a striking thing. It's just that the cost bearers are very concentrated, and the beneficiaries don't make their voices heard so much.
Yeah. Oh, it's really a step backwards for the U.S.
A lot of this has been the case for a long time, and we didn't see this. I mean, we saw some occasional actions on the trade front, during the Reagan administration on autos, during the Bush administration on steel and aluminum, but not widespread, not necessarily directed at specific countries and the way it's.
Yeah, look, the U.S. economy, you guys will know this better than I know. The U.S. economy loses something like 30 million jobs a year. 30 million jobs disappear a year for any reason. Company goes bankrupt, people get fired, foreign competition and so forth. And I think in the course of, since China's admittance to WTO, something like 2 million, so over like 30 years, 2 million U.S. manufactured jobs moved to China. So in a span of 600 million jobs being destroyed, so to speak, 2 million of these ended up in China. So it's it's sort of a metaphor that I think has assumed outsized importance in the discussion about if China didn't exist, our economy wouldn't be radically different. Let me give you one example to take home, if I may digress for a second. In the last few decades, every single oil and gas major in the U.S. stopped being an oil and gas major. In the last few decades, what did every oil and gas major become in the U.S.? Because the market changed, because technology changed, because society changed. They're no longer oil and gas companies. They're energy companies. Every major said, we're energy. And some do it better, slower, faster, fine. But they got it. That it's a different world now than 30 years ago, and what you better not do is stand still in a changing world. And I use that example to start with because not one iron and steel company said, we are a material science company. Not one. And the steel intensity of the United States economy, the percentage of the amount of steel consumed per unit of GDP has been in decline for about 70 some years, since the early 1950s. Because there are alternatives. There are alloys, there are polymers, there's molybdenum, there's carbon fiber, there's things you can do that are better than steel. So I can tell you what is going to happen about the steel usage in U.S. autos over the next 10 years. It is not going to go up. So the amount of steel being needed for our U.S. economy has been declining for 70 years straight. And it's easy if you're in that industry to say, well, the Koreans are cheating us, the Chinese are cheating us, the Germans are cheating, everybody's cheating us. Maybe there is some of that. But by the way, you're making a product that people don't like. You're making a product where people are desperate to find an alternative to. So now, the total number of United Steel workers in the entire country is something like 60,000, right? So the battle's already over. It has nothing to do with China. China illuminates this fact, and China might be guilty of all the criticism levied at it for improper trade practices. But to say, there's some broader issues here about what you're doing and why you're doing it that have nothing to do with foreigners. So you've got to think through the market adjusting and what you need to do about it. So China becomes an excuse for everybody's being mean to me. This is grievance politics. So maybe everybody's being mean to you, and maybe you just didn't adjust with the times.
In the similar vein, most jobs lost in the U.S., many more jobs were lost in the U.S. to robots than to Chinese workers. Yeah. But robots aren't really a good foil for political.
Right. And just automated assembly. I think UAW is down by 2/3 in 40 years, from like 1.5 million to 0.5 million. Well, and look, you tell me, the amount of car ownership per household in the United States. If we say, well, people are getting married later, family sizes are smaller, there's the advent of autonomous vehicles and gig apps on your phone that can get you a car. Is the household need for car ownership going to go up or go down over the next 10 years? So what's going to happen to U.S. auto production? So there's an adjustment going on. It's a social adjustment going down, and it's accelerated by the fact that you've got automation in these factories. But you just don't need cars the way you thought you needed them 30 years ago.
Cars are incredibly inefficient because they're parked most of the time.
Right.
So with autonomous cars, you could imagine running them 24 hours a day.
Right. Well, and I think we're making that transition now. By the way, I think, it's not a radical change, but whatever the number is, we say this year, the average American household owns 1.8 cars, or whatever it is. I'm saying 10 years from now, it'll be 1.7. So because people will say, I've got an electric bike, or I'll just take Uber to work, and I don't need to tie up that kind of money and that kind of machinery for 1 hour a day.
Yeah. You'll be able to send your car back home during the day while you're working, and it can be used by someone else. Yeah. Should we talk a little bit about why this happened now? Because the types of forces that you describe, the lobbying by those who stand to lose from trade, the visibility of job losses compared to the gains that people experience, that has always been there. Is it just that we have a champion for protectionism that happened to have won an election twice, or is it a deeper trend? I mean, we do see it in other countries as well. Is it just simply a response to Trump, or is it a broader phenomenon that the same causes bring the same effects in different places?
Yeah, I think there's a really interesting question out there about alienation. To what extent does the system more or less work? But alienation takes it one step further. To what extent do people more or less accept the system more or less works? And so is it economic mobility and prosperity in itself, or is it also economic prosperity as a metaphor for saying, I guess the society is more or less fair because I'm getting incremental raises and promotions and my kids have opportunities that I didn't have, so I think I'm more or less satisfied. And I think there is alienation out there. What the Dems found out last time, so Republicans found out, market or goal of international leadership was a very debatable proposition, and that there might be cost as much as benefits, and that there's not necessarily a U.S. consensus about international leadership the way there had been for 80 years. But the Dems have found out to say, look, you've got a successful, prosperous middle class and working class. They're going to be, as people attain some level of prosperity, they're more and more sensitive to the cultural issues. And if you're promulgating a society where they don't feel comfortable or they think the pace of change is in excess of their ability to sort of process and understand and embrace it, they're unhappy. They're unhappy. And so this part of grievance is sort of nostalgia and romanticizing the past. It might not be intellectually valid, it might not be accurate, but it's got a certain appeal for people who think society is changing too rapidly, or I'm unclear with some of the direction of society. And Trump at least stands for Make America Great Again. He stands for sort of nostalgia.
Yeah, this could be one explanation. One conclusion from this is that it could be a cyclical phenomenon. We've seen periods of retrenchment and protectionism in the U.S. in the past, in the 30s, but even in the 19th century, and it's basically a free trading country and a country of immigration. So it's basically a country that wants to interact with the rest of the world. Yeah. This will come back, in a cycle. Or if you ascribe this alienation to some structural forces, like perhaps the media environment, the way people interact with devices and things like that, it could be a more durable phenomenon. I don't know what your take is on that.
Well, I'm much more in the former camp, that it's more of taking a breather, taking a sounding, and the amount of people who benefit from international connectivity and know they benefit from it just continues to grow. And the idea that we need to organize the entire U.S. economy around those aspects that are shrinking the fastest or the less competitive, and the future is, let's find the 1% of U.S. businesses that are in danger of bankrupt, and let's protect all of them, and that's what's going to get us economic growth, I think is a misplaced hope.
Yeah, I think technology also is driving so much of the globalization that it's going to be hard for policymakers to overturn that, and we're seeing it in the Trump administration itself with, the exemptions they're putting on many tariffs, and of course other constituencies like the Supreme Court pushing back on some of the efforts. So I also share your optimism that globalization will return in force, perhaps as a reaction to the costs.
Well, the logic of it is so strong to say, look, to put it in tech terms, the U.S. was evolving from a content producer to a platform. And we still have great content. But if we can be the global platform, that's even better. That's even better. And people ask me, I've lived in Asia for about 20 years. We talk a lot of discussions about American society, culture, economy, and what makes it work, to which there are a host of answers. But one answer is that America is the best place in the world to take an idea. And a commercial idea, social idea, an app, a new spaghetti sauce, a new rap video, any idea. But if you bring it here, people will applaud the challenger, the disruptor. You can get money behind it. You can get legal protection for it. You can scale it. And you've done something. And not only that, but other people will see the idea and harness it, compete against it, capture it, modify it. And so you've got this great sort of platform view of innovation and disruption here. And I would say keep that intact. Don't ever lose that. And that means we've got this incredible venture capital community. We've got this incredible educational infrastructure. We've got an entrepreneurial mindset. And don't let that slip away from us, because that's the locomotive, I think, for the whole economy.
A lot of what powers that also is immigrants.
Yes,
and
yes.
So that's another aspect.
Sure.
Should we open it up to questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I wanted to keep about 20 minutes for questions.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. Absolutely.
Okay. All right, we have. Yeah. Please step up to the mic.
Hello, sir. Yeah. My question actually has to do with the U.S. dollar as the global reserve currency. Yeah. So you have a very unique position on policy and business and international trade, but there's current argument to be made that our status as that reserve currency is currently on shaky ground. Now, two questions. Do you believe that there's a chance of it to fall off and now the global market is potentially upended in that regard? And two, if so, how do you see that affecting everything from business in America to potential trade negotiations?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. Listen, I think so far we're okay in terms of the U.S. as the reserve currency for the world, but I think we've done a lot of damage to the U.S. reputation over the last year. So we're at the margin, we're a less inviting partner than we were a year ago. And but nobody's got the utility the U.S. dollar has, nobody has the depth the U.S. dollar has, nobody has the trading instruments the U.S. dollar has, nobody has the creativity the U.S. dollar has. So there's just things you can do with the U.S. dollar you just cannot do with other instruments. So we do have sort of a privileged position, but boy, when we step off that pedestal, there's a price you pay for. I said Trump enjoys management with friction. There's a price you pay for that. You're just a less inviting partner, and people at the margin adjust accordingly. So I think we probably lost market share, but I don't think anybody comes close. I don't think anybody can do what we do with the U.S. dollar.
The big alternative would be the yuan. It wouldn't be the euro. And the problem with that, of course, is that that China is a surplus country. So you need to be able to flood the international market with surplus dollars.
Well, it's not freely convertible. Yeah. And they're skittish of these instruments. When I was with Citibank, people could come in and say, here's what I need. I'm syndicating a $400 million loan because I'm going to build this chemical processing plant in China. But I need to do it this way, this and that. Can you guys do it? And it was very customized recipe. And we could do it. We could distribute a loan in Germany. We could set up a dummy company in Ireland to syndicate the loan. We could do like the 11 elements this guy needed to get his $400 million chemical plant going in China. And nope, nobody could do that. So they didn't have the currency, they didn't have the team, they didn't have the wherewithal to do it. So we enjoyed a terrific position as saying we can execute large-scale CapEx activity in China better than anybody, and you tell us what your tax domicile is, and we'll adjust accordingly. So we had sort of a magical position. I still think we largely enjoy that, but be careful of your reputation. George Shultz, who was Reagan Secretary of State and then in the Nixon cabinet, always used the metaphor of gardening. He said, you have to cultivate relationships. Don't take a relationship for granted, right? And people drift away. We know that in our personal life. That you always have to be outreach and seeing what the other person wants or needs or thinks, and can I be the best service provider for where you're trying to go, that I can keep that relationship intact. So I tell people, don't take the U.S. dollar strength for granted.
Hello, Ambassador Lavin.
Hi.
Thank you for your time. And I have a two-part question for you, time permitting. One is, I was curious, given your diverse experience, how your diplomatic career helped influence the way you advise corporations and you view corporate strategy and corporate as a board member.
Yeah.
And secondly, in your experience, how, if at all, do you think small, mid-sized companies can help governments create effective policies for businesses in the U.S.?
Yeah, those are two somewhat related questions. I would say in the first one, every single business operates in a public space more than ever now. There is a global conversation taking place about your company, your brand, your product, and how good it is, or bad it is, or fair it is, or unfair it is. And you need to help shape and lead that conversation. And in your home market, which I suspect for most people here is the U.S., in your home market, there's such a high degree of awareness of the product. There's sort of that home market bias. The employees are here, the stakeholders are here, the founders are here, the suppliers are here. So there's a high degree of awareness and participation about the business. But you all of a sudden start doing business in Indonesia and you say there's nobody. There's nobody who knows us, likes us, uses us, wants us, needs us. There's not one person who woke up this morning saying, I'm really glad this company is in from LA into Indonesia. Right? Now, theoretically, there's a value proposition to what we're doing that over time people do fall in love with us and our product and our services. But boy, there's a huge gap in vulnerability, you could say, what people aren't aware. So I would say you've got to think of a way to lean forward in that public space. If you don't define yourself, you're leaving it to others to define you. And if you're new to market or small in a market, or maybe even dislodging or dislocating somebody, an incumbent in that market, there could be pushback. And what do you do about that? And how do you develop profile? I think is absolutely important. And I think that ties into your second question about small businesses. Yeah, absolutely, you've got a voice and ought to be heard about. If the policy environment is the right kind of policy environment, we can expand and we can do more. And if it's a harmful environment, we're going to do less. When we negotiated the U.S.-Singapore Free Trade Agreement, we had all of these working groups of the American Chamber. That's something like 1,200 U.S. companies in Singapore. But the question we put to them was, look, this is your chance to put your ideas on the table. What activities can your company undertake in other markets that it cannot undertake in Singapore? What is banned or prohibitive or expensive or not practical in this market? And this is your time to clean it up, right? And we'll take this forward to the ministry if you let us know what these are. But to get that consciousness elevated, because most folks in government say, look, I'm process oriented, I've got my inbox, my outbox, I've got email, I've got my regulatory requirements, and I'm doing my job. And everybody outside is a supplicant and wants help and wants support, maybe so or maybe not. But for someone to say to them, yeah, you're on top of your area of responsibility, but let me tell you the 4 things I'm doing in Denver that I'm not doing in Los Angeles. And let me tell you the jobs I'm creating in Denver that I can't create here. And is there any way at all to help Los Angeles improve its operating environment a bit that would allow me to do the same things I'm doing in Denver and do them here? But I think that's an enormously helpful conversation to have with folks in government, because they don't always see the cumulative problems that they might be stewards of. So you've got a voice, please elevate your voice.
I was reading today about a new website about things you can't do in California, which includes opening new refineries, opening chip manufacturing is virtually impossible in California given regulations. Anyway, interesting websites to to look at. Let's go to this side, Amy, and we'll come to you after.
Thank you so much, sir. I'm a MBA class of 26. Before this, I was a journalist for almost a decade and a half. I was a TV host as well for BBC World and India's public broadcaster back in India. And I need to share a trivia. 10 years ago, 2 times on my shows, I used to cover geopolitics and global economics. That was my forte. I had to use your quotes 2 times. Don't ask me what the topic was, but then I had to use 2 quotes to kind of empower my shows and, of course, my knowledge base. Thank you so much for that.
I hope they were positive quotes. I hope
Well, absolutely, yeah. It was about the Reagan administration, so I had to take the quotes and then talk about the stuff. It's all about the global trade dynamics then. My question is, for almost 3 or 4 decades, we've seen the competition between the global powers, the economies was more about markets and trade. But now we're seeing a generational shift. It's all about who controls the choke points like semiconductors or critical minerals or even technology standards. Do you think this is like a temporary shift before returning to the old school of economics? Or do you think this is going to be the permanent setup for the next decade or 2?
I think a lot of it has to do with Trump. But once you erode goodwill and trust and respect, it doesn't automatically snap back. So the point is we are in this 80-year trend of incremental liberalization and international expansion and trade and investment and tourism and educational programs that redounded very much to our benefit. But boy, once you start picking fights, you've changed the entire tenor of that discussion and, went very aggressively with China. They might have deserved most or all, but China turned back on critical minerals and said we can play the same game. So instead of looking for ways to diffuse problems, he was looking for ways to inflame problems, and that there's a half-life to that. Look, all of us are subject to this kind of behavior. All of us are defined, so to speak, by our worst moments, and that might be unfair, but that's human nature. That if I see Romain 100 mornings in a row and I say good morning to him 99 times, and the 100th time I decide to swear at him, he doesn't say, well, Frank gets a 99%. He says, Frank is a lunatic. This guy was just swearing at me this morning. I don't know what his problem is. So the point is, try not to go through life, stepping on toes. Try not to go through life dialing up friction. And we always said, use of tariffs to help you get out on trade issues is like use of your car horn in traffic. That every once in a while you might need to get somebody's attention, but it really is not a steering wheel, it's not a gas pedal, it's really not a navigational aid, and you can end up hurting a lot of people. And we were very, very lucky over the last few decades to have Canada and Mexico as our main trading partners, to have rules-based, proximate people. The overwhelming majority of their imports came from the US. So we had this extraordinary beneficial relationship, which has now been damaged through, I think, personal mismanagement. And I think it's very difficult. Correct that. It's very difficult once you've said, I think the most intelligent thing I can do with Romain now is swear at him. It's very difficult to go back a few years later and say, what's new with you? Let's have lunch. And it just doesn't have the same impact.
Well, so, I would forgive you.
Thank you. Thank you. So I think the logic of internationalization will continue apace. People who participate in it will be better off. And I think the United States had occupied, in recent history, a very privileged position, and we've damaged it ourselves. So,
hello again, Ambassador. I want to take this opportunity to also say thank you to the class of 2022 for sponsoring this dinner.
Yay.
Yay. So I have an interest in foreign investments, and I am in some ways tied to the VC side and investing in startup companies here in America. A lot of these companies that are also coming from international sides are having a lot of trouble for many different reasons. So I have thought about ways in which to move capital from the United States to those different foreign countries, but then there's also a lot of taxing and a lot of complications involved. Then I met somebody at a conference who mentioned that Dubai, I believe, is the only country where you can establish, I believe, an account there so that you can make all these investments without multiple taxations. The catch, you cannot be a US citizen. I am a US citizen. I also have an opportunity to be a dual, well, technically right now I can't. I just wanted your advice in terms of thinking long term, thinking globalization. What are your thoughts about building out a financial accounts overseas, since you came from Citibank as well? Thank you.
Well, everybody here's got a different appetite for that kind of question. And I think most people say, I do want international exposure, part of portfolio theory, part of hedging, but I don't propose to actively manage it, right? So I'm going to use instruments, I'm going to use funds to do that. What I would tell people when I was with Citi in China is saying, if you want China exposure and you don't have any mechanism to manage that, Coca-Cola stock is your best bet. Coca-Cola stock and Marriott stock and Starbucks stock, and you'll get exposure. But you're talking about something a little more sophisticated. You're talking about something saying, look, I'm going to have such concentration overseas that I want to actually manage that. It's not passive investment. It's not portfolio investment. I think you're going to have to set up a legal entity overseas. I don't think you want. By the way, this is not uncommon. I think you'll find in any market overseas, you'll find 500 or 1,000 entities set up because people are doing what you're describing, that they want to invest in a mid-sized manufacturing company, and they think there's a good opportunity there. That manufacturing in Vietnam is going to outpace manufacturing in the U.S. And if you're comfortable with that, you ought to do it. But I think you do want some kind of shell or parent entity in country.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Subsidiary.
Hi, Ambassador Frank Lavin. I have a quick question on the conspiracy theory on China overtaking Taiwan. I think Iran and Israel war, China is gonna kind of sneak in and take over Taiwan, as I think the former CIA director kind of revealed there was a China readiness plan by 2027. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, look, it's a stated goal of the Chinese government, and it's central to sort of their public posture. So you could say it's almost a religious obligation to say Taiwan is part of China, and it's part of our destiny to reconstitute Taiwan under Chinese sovereignty. So that's, as sort of a organizing principle, I think goes without saying. What does that mean in the near term, what they're like to do? I don't think they're likely to do anything. I think so there's two elements of this that are very important to them. One, I just discussed. One, it is a public statement of principles that is central to their identity. And so it's in everything they do, they put that out. So that's very important. The second part I see is it's much more downside management than upside management, meaning I think they're much more concerned about Taiwan doing something deliberately or inadvertently to drift away or move away or step away, be less a part of China or less integrated with China. So I think most of what they do now is to manage against downside management. I don't think there's any active plan to invade or conquer. But boy, I would tell friends in Taiwan, you better take your security seriously. You better take deterrence seriously. And Putin's move into Russia, I think, illustrates to all of us that a geopolitical move could have very little rationale behind it, and still somebody could end up saying, let's go ahead and do it. So you can't simply tell yourself to say this just doesn't make a lot of sense. They'll hurt themselves more than they help themselves, and let it go with that. So they need to upgrade their defense commitment, their security commitment. And they're doing so this year, but I'd keep a wary eye on Beijing.
Okay, one more question. Do you think U.S. is kind of playing both sides, like kind of using Taiwan as leverage to kind of act like they're on China's side? And at the end of the day, Taiwan is the one that's going to hurt them.
The core element of U.S. policy is simply to say the ultimate resolution should be decided peacefully. So it's not to endorse Taiwan independence. It's not to endorse unification either, but simply to say, well, we don't want to see a war. And we say peaceful, it should enjoy the majority support on both sides of the strait. So if the majority of people in Taiwan think here's an outcome that we're satisfied with, the majority of people of mainland think so. By the way, that was also, to go back to Romain's earlier comment a few minutes ago, that was also an example, I think, of a 20-year engagement strategy that sort of more or less worked and then faded, because in terms of tourism, trade, investment, education, there's an extraordinary amount of soft integration between Taiwan and the mainland. But
It's
it
gone,
didn't.
right?
It's gone. it's
The
the romance is faded.
No,
Yeah.
I was giving the example of Foxconn, the company that makes the Apple.
Right.
You know, that's a Taiwanese company that operates mostly in China.
Right.
So there is indeed a tremendous amount.
There's a lot going on there, but politically, there's no love. There's no love politically. So,
Thank you.
Well, thank you all, and thank you, Ambassador Lavin, for
thank you.
coming here.
Thank you. That's fun.
It was great. Thank you for your insights. Also, thank you to the class of 2022 for supporting these events. They're really exceptional. And now let's have dinner.
Let's have the right to eat. Thank you.